Hello, friends. Thanks so much for joining today. We are so grateful that today we get to talk to Dr. Chuck DeGroat. He is absolutely awesome, and we get to talk to him about his new book, Healing What's Within, Coming Home to Yourself and to God When You're Wounded, Weary, and Wondering. So excited if you're listening live. This book comes out tomorrow. Many of you know Chuck DeGroat already in his wonderful work. He has also been instrumental in helping pastoral care, just the issues around narcissism. He's a type 4 in the Enneagram, follower of Christ. He's husband to Sara of 30 years, father to two amazing daughters. And he's also a professor of counseling and Christian spirituality and executive director of the clinical mental health counseling program at Western Theological Seminary. So you might know him because he's so gifted, like I said, with trauma and doubt and just walking through the dark nights on the faith journey, of course, in that Enneagram 4 space. But he's also really shining out here in his talk with us today, but also in his book coming out, like I said, tomorrow, if you're listening live. Um, he is right there with us on personal stories as well. And I feel like we learn so much better when somebody is real with us and authentic. And it's very hard to do. I try to do that with my audience here, with you. I know I can always grow in that way, but I just appreciate him tracking with us on a story level because I think we really grow and learn when we can really hear what's going on. And he has some trauma that he walked through even after doing some of his work. So very excited to get the help from him on this. He also is recommended by so many people we love here, Dr. Kurt Thompson, Andy Kolber, Dan Ellender. And so we are just in for a treat as we learn from him. I hope you're well today. A quick word that if any of you are struggling in a hurricane zone, I know by the time this episode airs, I've got my candle behind me if you're watching on YouTube. But yeah, we're just in that mode of prepping a little bit. Wes is getting our generator stuff all lined up. Again, I feel so much for those of us who are in the southern regions just trying to recover already from another hurricane. We were so fortunate, as you might have heard me say last week, to really not have direct effects, although we've been trying to care for our community. And we'll see what we have this time, but we're always having something of like, there's some trauma to work through, some, wonderful moment of joy. Then there's something else. So this is just a live action moment for all of us as we're walking through big things. And I hope that you are just here with me for the journey. So let's talk to Chuck. Also, don't forget our contest ends tonight, midnight as well, for my book, which was its 1 year anniversary, The Enneagram in Marriage. So thankful we got to pass that last week. And we're just doing our contest. So make sure you check out the show notes if you want to leave a review or if you left one and you want to be entered in a contest to win my book, a signed copy, as well as a glow guide, which is our pairing guide, 2 deep dive guides, and one of our Supper Sleuths mystery dinner games. So all of that is in the show notes for you too. All right, let's talk to Chuck. Chuck, we are so thankful to have you on the Enneagram and Marriage podcast today. You're so well loved. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. It's so good to be here.
Well, today we get to share in helping people who are just feeling weary in their souls. You and I have seasons, ups and downs and grief, and our audience is so blessed. Will you tell those who don't know you yet a little bit about yourself? And I'll probably ask a few Enneagram questions within this, even though I think I know your type.
Yeah. Well, I was a pastor for a number of years in Orlando and San Francisco. I've been a therapist for over 25 years, a writer. I started a couple of church-based counseling centers. I've been married for 30 years and I have 2 adult daughters, the oldest who just got married and who is now my student in a new clinical mental health counseling program at the seminary where I teach. And so I've gotten to do some really extraordinary things and live in extraordinary places and, blessed to have a beautiful family too. So that's a little bit about me. I could say more, but
That's amazing. I love, so you're at Western Theological Seminary, right? And you guys are
yes.
launching a new program. Is this a master's of mental health?
Yeah, that's right. So it's a program that I had hoped to help launch about 11 years ago. I taught part-time in a program back a number of years ago, and doing a program like this when I was in seminary was transformational. I mean, it was in this. I was a master of divinity student with a lot of answers, a lot of certainty, and this was the place that really transformed my own heart and awakened me to a lot of what was going on within me. And so I've been wanting to do a program like this for a number of years in the seminary. I was finally ready to do it, and so we launched. We are in our 3rd week of the program, so it's all fresh and new. We've got 17 students, and it's really great.
I love that. This is where your daughter is with you, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh
Yeah,
my gosh,
yeah.
that's amazing. And I
So
love
that's a very interesting experience, as you can imagine.
Yes, I can. It's got
Yeah,
its quirks. And tell us if you know her personality type too, and your personality type as
yeah.
well, and your wife.
Well, so on the Enneagram, which by the way, I was introduced to back in the late 1990s. So I've been working with it for a long time, and it's been, in its own way, so transformational. But I identify as a 4. My wife identifies as a 9. My oldest daughter is a 1, and my youngest, who's 21 years old, as a 6. And my daughters have been working with the Enneagram. In fact, years ago, I remember walking out. It was a Saturday morning. They had some friends over, and my oldest, who was probably in 8th grade or something at the time, is saying, "Well, I don't know if you're a 1. I think you're a 6 because I don't think that your anxiety looks like this. I think it looks like that." And I was like, "What have I done?"
Yeah.
So,
So young to do,
it's
yeah.
something our family has worked with, and my daughters have not done. Maybe they've done more with the Myers Briggs. I test as an INFJ on the Myers Briggs.
Mhm.
If your
Yeah.
listeners are familiar with that,
Oh,
so
yeah.
yeah,
Yes, many of us are. We love that. And I tested with Myers-Briggs before Enneagram when I was at Wheaton.
yeah,
So I
okay,
love that we were able to add, Enneagram later. They didn't have it then, they
yeah,
do now. But I
okay,
love that you have the richness and depths of the 4 and the 4-9 pairing. There's a lot of ethereal qualities to that.
mhm,
I have a lot of couples that come to me with that pairing, and there's a lot of just beauty to that. And we know there's a
yeah,
lot of sorrow to each pairing
yeah,
as well and
yeah,
shadows.
yeah,
But it's
yeah,
neat
that's
for
right,
me to hear that you guys have known your types for quite a while. And that, like you said, your daughter being then and now, having her as a 1, she's
right.
keeping on your toes, right?
Yeah. Oh, she does. Oh, and now as my student, right? Dad, you should really do this, and Dad, you should really do that, and
Yes.
so it's. But I think what's beautiful about it is this is something we've worked with for so long that it's sort of it's easy to have the conversation, right? She's like, "Dad, you cried in class 11 times last week," and um, and so I was like, "Well, there you go. There's a little bit of my 4ness coming out, and there's a little bit of your 1ness coming out right there."
Ooh, yes. Yes, you told her, like, "I see you also in what you just noticed about
Yeah,
class."
yeah,
Oh my gosh, but you said, and this is probably why you're so happily geeked out about your daughter being in the cohort,
yeah,
is your own work was transformative, and I heard you on
yeah.
another podcast talking about that, how, when we don't do our own work, we can be a threat to our clients, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think it was my first counseling professor who said, "If you don't do your work, you'll be dangerous to people." And, I
Mhm.
mean, I think it was, that felt like someone hitting me over the head with a 2 by 4 back in the day, but now I see it as an incredible gift and grace of him saying to me, "Chuck, if you bring your wounds, unhealed wounds into ministry, you will wound others." And I do think that there's something about that program that I did in the late 1990s when I discovered that program, in large part because I was in a program that was the majority of people in the program were women
Mhm.
who, had the courage and the capacity to reflect back to me what they were seeing.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes you can do your own self work, right? You can do a personality test, but oftentimes we need someone else to share their experience of us.
Yeah.
And that was incredibly important for me back in the day for 2 years to have women and men alongside me who were saying, "This is how I experienced you. This is how you showed up tonight. This is what I needed when we were co-counseling our clients and what I
Mhm.
didn't get from you. This is when I felt like you took over and didn't let me speak." All of these things that contributed to my own self-awareness and self-understanding, and of course, to places of some grief and some confession and repentance and things like that that are so important in the work too.
Oh my goodness, that's really good that you're reminding us all of that because it can
Yeah.
be, even on my show, a shadow temptation to keep people individualistic. I'm here in America. I'm an Enneagram 7. I'm
Mhm.
afraid to trust others. And so,
Yeah.
just I'd like to have guests on who remind me, challenge me, our listeners
Yeah.
to trust in the richness of healthy community. And of
Yeah.
course, I think I'm so thankful for my time at Wheaton because boy, did they break some of my shame down and
Mm.
expose things in healthy, safe
Yeah.
ways. But
Yeah.
you're saying it's got to be done in community is where I'm first hearing you
Yeah.
say the work cannot just be done individually.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so, and I think that needs to continue, and I think we often say every therapist needs a therapist. I think if you're doing this kind of work, you need friends, you need colleagues, you need trusted people in your life who can
Mhm.
reflect back to you what they're seeing or who you can go to with some of what's going on inside of you. And so, yeah, the work continues. I mean, I kind of thought the work might be done when I turned 40, and then I thought certainly it'll be done by the time I turn 50, and I'm 54 now, and it's not done yet apparently. So, it continues.
The Lord gives us time apparently in this way to continue
A
growing.
lot of time.
I'm
Yeah.
similar to you in the Myers-Briggs. And for those who understand some of the cognitive functions, we're both high on the authenticity scale. So that can take time. I'm learning to plug through because of that desire to be understood authentically as who we are. And we can
Yeah.
say, just for those who aren't familiar with that scale, you're a type 4. You want to be understood authentically. But I
Mhm.
think anyone with that, it just takes longer for us to really get around the idea of, first of all, you have to do the work that you're not to be ashamed of who you are. And
Yeah.
from that space to
Yeah.
realize you can continue to grow. Is that sort of what you would
Yeah.
say?
Yeah, that's right, that's right, and I think that was challenging to discover too, as you know, as it always is with the Enneagram, where it's not always kind, the things that you discover about yourself,
Yeah.
do feel like you're being, poked a bit, and I was in a seminary with a lot of men who had their acts together, they kinda put together, they were smart, they were head types, they were
Mhm.
probably mostly T's, and here I was always kinda looking around wondering, "Why am I so different? Why do I feel so different?
Yeah.
Why am I so sensitive?" Right? I would also identify as an HSP, highly sensitive person.
Mhm.
Why, right? And so part of the work was discovering these things, as gift, and, I do think in the early days, I didn't experience these things as gift, or my personality, who I was as gift, it was more like shame. Like, if only
Mhm.
I could be different, if only I could measure up to, some supposed, ideal of what a man should look like. But as it turns out, over these last 25 years, I've worked with so many folks, and many, many women in particular, who've experienced abuse, sexual abuse, spiritual abuse, emotional abuse. And I think my sensitivity, my capacity to listen here, my authenticity, vulnerability, it's been a real big part of that.
Mm, mm. That's good to hear that you aren't abandoning these gifts and that you
Yeah.
are able to even stop and see them as gifts. And
Yeah.
that is, I think, a really critical piece of doing our Enneagram work because you're right, it can be negative. And of course, I do a lot of brain research as you, as does every
Mhm,
therapist, we hope. And we see the power of positivity as
mhm,
bringing neurogenesis. And so
mhm.
you're helping us to see you're allowed to own your gifts and to hone them. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And again, that for your listeners who where it takes a little longer, like me, than for others. I mean, it does seem at times like people that neurogenesis does that work quicker in some people than in me, And I've had that over the years, and
I would,
there is that sense that no, there's always going to be a tenderness, a vulnerability, a sensitivity that's not supposed to go away. That's all good. That's all part of who I am, by nature, by grace, by life experience. It's all part of the package.
yes. Oh my goodness. And I think especially for those who have a 4 part of them
Mhm.
to really take it slow. If there's one thing I've
Yeah.
learned about 4s is, and my eldest is a 4, my almost 19-year-old, is
Mm.
they need a lot of time and we aren't to rush them. And
Yeah,
so
that's
I
right.
love that you're giving us permission for taking our
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Good. That's beautiful.
Yes, I'm learning that slowly. Tell us about your new book in terms of, obviously I've shared with you, I love your title, your subtitle,
Yeah.
talking about coming home to ourselves. And I would love to know just what gave you the heart
Yeah.
for others in this way.
Yeah, so this will be my sixth book, I think. And all of them in their own way have been about the journey that we go on from the very beginning. The first book that I wrote was on the Exodus story and how we're all on an Exodus journey. So
Mhm.
each of them is about this journey that we're on. there might be one exception, a book that I wrote on narcissism in the church, and that was the last one. And in fact, there's a whole section, a couple of different sections on the Enneagram in there, and what it looks like through a
Mhm.
narcissistic lens. And I think this book really came out of that work, the larger work, of course. But I think as I've been doing this work over the last number of years, one of the things I've heard from people is like there's been so much that has happened to me in life, a lot of which I can't control. Some things that have been felt like injustices. How do I heal? And at least in part, what this book came out of was my conviction. And it's not just my conviction; it's a conviction of many who understand trauma. That trauma is not what happens to us, but what happens within us. It's the imprint of what happens to us. It's that the lingering impact in our bodies. And that was my own story too. Pushing in my early years in ministry to the point where I landed in the hospital.
Mhm.
My body at that point septic at 42 years old. You know, can you imagine that?
Wow.
And that really turned the corner for me as I started to pay attention to my own chronic dysregulation. And so this book really comes out of a journey that I haven't talked much about at all. I haven't written about. It's the first time I'm really sharing more of my own story. I've not really felt permission to do that until now, but it's a book that comes out of my own story, my own pain,
Mhm.
my own pushing through my limits,
Mhm.
and it's a book that talks about how we heal what's within, which is to say, how we shift our attention from the things that happen to us to that lingering imprint within us in our bodies and our autonomic nervous systems.
Thank you. That's
Uh,
extremely powerful that you're going to the self to talk about vulnerably this time. And I know you were vulnerable before. It's vulnerable even to pick up a pen and write a book. There's all kinds of
right?
shame that's
Yeah,
used,
yeah,
and joy is obviously too. But I'm just so glad that this time you felt like it was time because those are my favorite. I've just noticed recently my favorite books to read are, and I always knew this about classic books with my favorite classical writers that they were the first psychologists. But now
yeah.
I'm feeling like when I read a biography, it's absolutely the most instructive to me about
Mm,
how to live well. And that sounds like what you're saying. And you're being so vulnerable to say when I was feeling like I was living well, it was actually turning me septic. And here's what I
yeah,
learned. So
yeah,
I'm so
yeah,
eager, as I'm sure our listeners are.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, it feels strange to talk about because I think during those years I was working with people as a therapist, as a pastor. I was leading retreats. So to look back and to say, I was in some dysregulation during that time. I was pushing
yeah,
is feels a little scary to say out loud because like all of us, I want people to think well of me. I want people to think well
yeah,
of those years. But
yeah.
there's also that sense in which God uses us even in those seasons when
Mhm.
we are dysregulated or there is a lot going on that we're not quite aware of yet. And
Mhm.
what's interesting about it is I was in therapy at the time, but even still, we can be in therapy. We can pay attention to our stories. We can look at the past. We can even look at our Enneagram types, but we can miss what's going on in our bodies, in our nervous systems. And I think that's what was going on with me is I knew a lot about myself, about my story, about my Enneagram type. I could tell you, about my mask and the shadows behind it. But
Mhm.
what I wasn't aware of was the churn within, what I call the sympathetic storm, the sympathetic nervous system
Mhm.
storm within, and how that was playing out within me, and the tax, the toll that I paid living in sympathetic storm, in part because of my own story of pain within the context of the church. So this actually felt like the next book after the narcissism book to chart the course of healing because so many people after I wrote the narcissism book reached out to say, how do I heal?
Mm. Thank you for just addressing that and even hinting that our work may be coming from hurts we've had within the church. And that's been a more safe topic to mention lately, but it's so critical because we know
Yeah,
large systems can be so corrupt and
yeah,
absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so you're just
yeah,
saying when we hand over our license to these are church leaders, they can't be, they can't be fallible. We don't say that, but we kind of do that when we stop thinking for ourselves or just become
yeah,
so culturally compliant. So you're just saying like some
yeah.
of your story, obviously God still used you in those years.
Oh yeah,
You're like,
yeah.
I had to come to terms with a lot there.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it's what's challenging is my story isn't unlike other people's stories where you experience some hurt and you sort of put your head down and you're doggedly determined to make it, like you're going to get through, right? And people are often very impressed by that. I remember people saying to me, "You're so resilient, Chuck," and
Mhm.
I think I now know that that's not what resilience is. Resilience isn't what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Resilience isn't dogged determination.
Mhm.
But back then, I think I just put my head down and I was like, I have to get through, and that have to get through that lasted about 6 or 7 years before I landed in the hospital. And so it's a lesson to all of us who even know something about ourselves, know something about our stories, our Enneagram types, to pay attention a little bit more deeply.
Yes, thank you. And, I think that's where I can see your subtitle of your book about the wounded, weary, and
Yes.
wondering because
Yeah.
that's a lot of people who are out there poised as helpers, but
Yeah.
absolutely not doing their deep work. Something that I've been reflecting on lately is that each type has their own way of avoiding doing their emotional work. And that includes fours. And even today
Yes.
I saw a
Oh yeah.
friend's Facebook and, I don't think he's walking on this healthy psychological journey that we're even trying to do, but he said, bring on the melancholy thoughts. And I thought, okay, interesting. I wasn't trying to judge, I was trying to approach with
Yeah.
curiosity, of course, but
Yeah.
it makes me remember that sometimes just knowing and thinking it through isn't enough. And I
Yeah.
guess I wondered what's helped you to dive in to the deeper because again, fours, just because they're fours doesn't mean that they're always diving in deeper. Sometimes like
No,
you
not
said,
at
there's
all.
social structures that make us feel awkward, especially if we're in that
Yeah.
heart triad and we want to please others.
Yeah, that's the myth of force, right? That we're all deep and we're all authentic and we're all doing our own work. And sometimes the drama within is a means of avoiding the work, And I
Mhm.
know from my own story, I'd identify in terms of the subtypes as a self-pres for,
That's what I wondered when you said
self-preservation for.
that diligence sort of, we see the self-press word with that. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And self-pres fours tended to be cut off from their emotions at some point, right? So
Mhm.
I think for me, and this continued into my seminary journey, there was this undercurrent of emotion, of vulnerability, tenderness, sensitivity that I sort of cut myself off from
Mhm.
because I think there was this value in my home growing up on being strong, being maybe not tough, but just kind of keeping it together.
Mhm.
And I was the oldest kid, and my mom and dad had marriage problems, and so I was the little helper, and so I
Mhm.
was together for my mom. I was the surrogate husband. Now I'm saying a whole lot about my own story, right?
Yeah,
But
thank
I
you
can
though
tell
for sharing.
this is why we have to connect the dots of our own lives and our own stories. But when you play that role and you sort of have to keep it together for the
Mhm.
adult, which is not something that we're supposed to do as kids, right?
Yeah.
There's a cost into adulthood, and so I think the cost for me was like I was cut off from some of my own needs. I was cut off from some of my own vulnerability, and yet it was all swirling underneath there, right? And so fours
Mhm.
have to do
Mhm.
just as much work as anyone else of kind of going underneath from a vantage point of clarity and from some distance, because we can be flooded with emotions. We can lose ourselves in our
Mhm.
emotions.
Thank you for sharing that because I think we know and we stereotype a bit, but we just know some types like threes, eights, and sevens, for instance. We've got to do our work or we're gonna be a hot mess. We're gonna, in our leadership, influence a lot of people
That's
negatively.
right.
But like we're all saying these other six types, everyone for a different reason has something, and thank you again for being vulnerable.
Yeah.
We're running so fast culturally too,
Yeah.
even fours, like we said, most are not hitting that awareness of how fours need extra time. But I think we all need extra time now that we're all dopamine influenced by our phones.
Yeah.
What are you noticing amongst your graduate studies and your psychological work that is helping you and others to slow down, to be less toxic to ourselves and our others
Yeah.
in our lives, if you will?
Yeah, I think probably a few things for me. One of the early ones actually after that trip to a hospital in Mexico, where I discovered some of this about myself. One of the early practices was the practice of contemplative prayer, which is actually an ancient Christian practice of entering into silence and solitude, connecting with your breath and experiencing God at your very center. St. Augustine said a long time ago, God is more near to you than you are to yourself. And there's something about that that's really beautiful. You don't have to climb some sort of ladder to God. God is already in you and near you and present to you. And so that was very, very important. Like Chuck, you can stop, you can relax, you can slow down and be connected to the one who's already communing with you. That's been a practice that has been important to me. I think I've had to be I pushed really hard in the first part of my ministry life, so I've had to be really clear about my boundaries. And this is going to sound kind of obvious to some listeners, but some of us who teach on these things don't do it well in our own lives.
Self-test fours need this really. So
Yeah, right,
I love that you learned that.
yeah, well, I mean, one of the big ones was I'm not going to open my laptop in the evenings. That started when I moved here to Michigan in 2012, and my daughters, when they were younger, they remember me being, Dad's got work to do. Dad's got a laptop on his lap. Dad's at work, even when he's home, right? And so things like that, where I gave myself permission to have more space. Another thing too in my world, where I teach at a seminary, I've got a PhD. There's there's always a little bit of this is a great place, but there's always a little bit of a sense of having to prove yourself. For me, it was I don't have to be an expert in everything. I don't need to have a certificate in everything. I've been working with IFS, internal family systems, for years and years, with the Enneagram for years and years, but with some of these things, I was like, I don't need to do another certification. I don't need to do more education. What I'm doing, how I'm engaging it is just fine. It's enough. At times you just have to sort of whisper to yourself, it's enough. And so those are a couple of things that I can think of.
Yeah. And I like how you likened it to many of our listeners, whatever their type, also experienced a parentified child sort of role growing
Yes.
up. And so they can relate to that inner critic being quite severe to say, you must keep going, or even if it's just the overlay of the three in the American
Yeah, that's
culture.
right.
And so I know that I can experience that a lot. And so just reminding yourself with that gentle voice, reminding you, I love how you said God is already near us. I just did an IFS certification. So it's kind of like you're reminding me too, right here, like do the work, stop adding to what you've already got in your tool belt and just do your own emotional work.
That's
But
right.
you're being gentle and you're saying slowing down, giving yourself permission to be with your people.
Yeah, I think you named it. We live in this sort of dopamine addicted world, right? And I think particularly today, even those of us who are doing the work of helping others, therapists and caretakers of all sorts, right? There's always something more. And you're comparing yourself. If you're on Instagram, you're like, wow, she's got the prettiest Canva posts, and he's got the most credentials, and whenever she shares, it's just so wise, and wow, she seems to have access to all the best poetry and all the best research, and it's this world of comparison. And he's got this certificate, and she's got 5 certificates, and it's all too much, right? And so we do need to kind of slow down. And I think part of it too is just finding what am I uniquely called to? Because I don't need to you've got this beautiful sort of lane that you're in, that you offer your goodness to the world, but you can't do everything, right? So what do I have to offer? And that's enough.
Thank you. That's so helpful. And I just had to say no to something. They were like, somebody was like, my son's piano teacher. She's like, can you do a talk on ADHD? And I'm like, remember that one you did? And no, you didn't. You could pull up your notes. And I was like, no, I'm not in that lane right now. And I'm here. A wonderful colleague. He's going to do a great job. So I love that we're all getting active reminders. You don't have to do it all. But we do have to do some things. And so that's, we all have our role to play. And that's what healthy authenticity teaches is, stay in your lane, but do the work. So when you get to that lane, you're slowing us down. And I'm assuming this is some of the work of the narcissist too. We all have some narcissistic tendencies, but I mean, somebody who's kind of avoided doing the work for a long time. What can any of us, wherever we are on that narcissistic or otherwise dysfunctional spectrum, what can we do when we're trying to get familiar with ourselves? And you and I know some things about IFS, and I think many of our audience members do, but what are some ways that you try on a simplistic level to get people to connect with their emotions?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I think what the core of it is living in disconnection. Disconnection from our bodies, our feelings, from God, from even some of our closest relationships. And I see people who are elevated on the narcissistic spectrum, but when I work with ordinary people who aren't even that elevated, there's often some form of disconnection. And so at least part of the work is inviting people into that curiosity, like what's going on underneath that I haven't paid attention to. I ended up landing in a hospital. That was a rude awakening, right? That awakened me to things going on in my body that I wasn't paying attention to. But what you and I see, I'm sure, in our work is ordinary people who are pushing through because life demands it sometimes, right? Maybe you're a stay-at-home mom and you've got a couple of kids and you're listening to this podcast, but that you've got 5 other things you need to do over the next hour, and you're just multitasking. Whatever the case may be, there's that sense of, well, what's going on underneath? Because there are feelings and needs and bodily sensations that are important to attend to. And there's that undercurrent of sadness that you've been ignoring. I wonder what that's about. And there's that little bit of stomach pain that has just been kind of around for the last month, but you're trying to ignore it because you can't take on another thing. You can't think about another thing. So how do I attend to that little bit of stomach pain? Just get curious about what's going on there. There's that kind of brewing, simmering sort of fight that you and your spouse have been having that you've just been, I'm just gonna sweep it under the rug and kind of just make a nice dinner and make it okay. But how do I attend to that? So how do we begin to pay attention to these things within us and among us that we've not been attending to?
That's a really good reminder, is just be listening for these things swirling around versus just going in this robotic way of I have to pursue the next thing. And a friend of mine who is very wise and discerning and probably does a lot of these things to emotionally regulate, but she just sent me a habit tracker. And so we're used to these things being sent our way. We're happy to check the box. And so I like how you're reminding us we're allowed to go sit back with it. That's been really healing lately on my journey to do that. It's been the first time in a long time that I've let myself sit for 30 minutes or so and just really do my work in a long time, really. And what I think comes up for a lot of people as they're doing this with us is now it's vulnerable. How do I bring that to my spouse too? Because I notice even within my own marriage, sometimes I think so many of us are like this, that we do this to each other where we're starting to get our bearings, we're starting to get healthy, and then our partner sees it, sabotages it unintentionally because we're not like we used to be. And then they're like, come on, get a move on. Like, where's all your habits? And so sometimes I'll even notice my own stuff rise up and then be like, I got to go take care of somebody. And my husband said the other day, he's been sick with a bike injury. God bless him. He has 4 broken ribs and a collarbone broken. So I was doing a couple sessions and he goes, their sessions were a few minutes longer. He's not used to seeing me around. He's a very bustling Enneagram 1. So he's not used to being at home. And I was like, I just shoved it right down. I was like, he's not feeling well. He's not used to being down. So let me attend to him. And I laughed. I let the 7 joy out and I was like, honey, it was like 2 to 3 minutes. But what I really could have said in that moment is like, gosh, honey, I need emotional regulation after my sessions. I need rituals of putting things away.
away, calm me down. And maybe
That's
that's, for
good.
example, because he was in dire straits.
Yeah,
But I guess I'm just saying there's so many times when me too, we're not in dire straits and we're urging each other. So have you
yeah.
talked about that or thought about that with partners, how we can encourage the work in each other without sabotaging?
Yeah, yeah, it's I mean, it's tricky because every relationship is different, right?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
many marriages, there is really isn't a habit of checking in at this
Yeah.
level, and so
Mhm.
it does feel like you sort of have to just begin by sticking your toe in the water,
Yes.
I think oftentimes when I've done this work,
Yeah.
it's like I just wanna go to the deep end right away, and I wanna have
Yeah.
the marriage that I thought that I've always dreamed of having, and so I'm
Yeah.
gonna open us up to this big conversation tonight,
Yeah.
and it's probably not gonna happen in the way that you hope it's going to happen,
Mhm.
but I often, when I work with individuals and couples, a lot of what we talk about, as therapists, is pacing, taking it
Mhm.
slow. What's the right pace for your marriage, and sometimes that pacing is important as I work with couples where it's like, he's just getting used to, opening to maybe just a little bit of what's going on inside of him. So let's just like get curious about one thing that happened at work today
Yeah.
that he might be able to say, yeah, I felt angry about that, or I felt sad when that happened.
Yeah.
And we don't have to like at that point push him into the deep end and say we've got to, but let's
Yes.
just sort of warm up, and
That's
I
good.
think I think again we all have a lot going on in our lives, and so but I think what ends up happening as you do this work is you begin to sense that this actually feels good because
Yes.
as you and I know this is what God created us for. This is our birthright to be seen, to be known, to feel safe, to feel secure, to be heard, and so we all long for that. And so I'll often say your spouse in his depths longs for this. He just doesn't know it yet.
Yeah. Ooh, I like that. That's good, and it's neat to be that witness to your spouse if you can do it a little bit, and then I do believe that oftentimes they can do it for you a little bit more because you're modeling it for them.
Yeah.
And I watched myself doing that with my husband recently, where when he had the bike accident and said like this is a tough moment, there would be that part of me that was the seven that my way of kind of sabotaging his work was to say, I know, but let's not rush into like thinking about a surgery since they told you 6 weeks. Let's just try to
Mm,
wait that 6 weeks, and
yeah.
instead of just letting him grieve, like what if I'm
Yeah.
going to need a surgery and what if this takes longer?
Yeah.
So it was something I was able to just notice with curiosity, watching myself, and at least then I could go back, which is often I think the work with my couples. I say if you don't catch it the first time, just go back. I don't know if you're from you do that too sometimes, but it helps you to go back and say I see what I'm doing to you. I'm so sorry. I just need to sit with you.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's so helpful. Yeah, and as you do that, you slowly become more attuned to one another. But that doesn't happen quickly. And I think even as I do the work in counseling, I'll start that way when I'm working with someone new. I'll just take it really slow and get curious. And I think one of the things in this new book, I use the 3 questions that God asks in Genesis chapter 3, and it begins with the question, "Where are you?" And I love that because God's very first question in all of Scripture is a really curious and compassionate one.
Mhm.
Adam and Eve are hiding. They're shamed. They're sowing fig leaves, and that's where we are too. That's our story, right? So, where are you? What's going on within? That beginning to pay attention to what's beneath the surface, and we get the invitation to go deeper and deeper and deeper.
Wow, that's going to be so wonderful to read. And your healing gift as a four is seen already here today.
Mm,
I want to talk about where people can find it in a moment, but I'm thankful and excited. I want to say that I believe this work is going to help a lot of people with, like we talked about earlier, church hurt too, because
mm,
so many of us were brought
yes.
up in a place and a safety with God that we maybe had naturally. At least I was one like that. And then I was brought into a church which said, you're bad, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And we forget that God came in with this loving, curious
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, and I think it helps that's in part why I think that last book on narcissism in the church and this one, they sort of go hand in hand because we do have to name the hard things that happen, right? Like we need to get honest about, even if the church is implicated in it, which is really painful, right? But we have to get honest. But then we have to kind of turn our gaze to the wound it's left behind. And I know for me, I ignored some of those wounds, even though I was a therapist, even though I'd been trained to do the work, I was ignoring my own wounds. And so I say that out loud because I hope that humanizes it for all of us. Like we're all prone to do this. There's no one who's sort of above doing having to do the work and pay attention, right? So we're all human. That's all we can be. And so we can begin to get curious with one another in ordinary relationships, friendships, in our marital relationships. We can find our way to a spiritual director, to a therapist. Just find your way to someone who will be curious with you, get to know you, get to know your heart.
That's so safe and sacred. Thank you so much, Chuck. I have seen some of this on your Instagram page. And like we said, you're all over on podcast interviews. You have a great website, many books. Tell us
Yeah.
about the next one so we can access it. It's coming really soon.
Yeah, it'll be October 8th, and I'm excited about that because, as you know, like the writing process, it just takes a long time, and there's a lot involved. And I'll be grateful for the day when it's finally released into the world. It's called "Healing What's Within: Coming Home to Yourself and to God When You're Wounded, Weary, and Wandering." And it's available wherever you can buy books and all that stuff. And my website is chuckdegroat.net. You can find out more about it there. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, awesome. Thank you. And everything's in the show notes too. Thank you so much for blessing us today.
Oh, I'm so grateful to be invited onto your podcast. I've heard so many good things, so thanks for the invitation.
Thank you.
Okay, so glad we got to learn from Chuck today. I hope you're really, really receiving that message that you're allowed to take time and slow down. I'm learning it too from him and continuing to learn that otherwise. But this is a great gift to us today to have had this chance to talk to him. I hope you'll grab his book, it's in the show notes. Make sure you play our contest and leave that review. It helps so much. Of course, do the same for him if you enjoy his book. And I am so excited for you to get your hands on it. Also, make sure that you just learn one thing from today. Take it with you. Allow yourself to digest something important that you're bringing out with you. Even if you're like me and today is a day you just need some rest, which is what I'm doing a lot of today. And I'm grateful for that opportunity. We're having Gilmore Girls season start today. And I'm just grateful for a little downtime before the big week. So, hope you have that too. Blessings. I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.